guys, they showed up this morning. Guys, signed up for this. It was 45 out. That's where.
Yeah, make them a fresh pot of coffee. They'll be happy.
Oh, I did construction for about 13 years, and I hated this time of year.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks again for sticking around. A couple things I didn't mention before is today's sponsored by Midwest Farmers Co-op. So if you guys know anyone from Midwest Farmers or you do business there, thank them if you see them for sponsoring today. We appreciate I think they've sponsored every year that we've had this. So do appreciate that. And I failed to mention that at the beginning. So anyway, wanted to touch on that. Now this is our ag tech panel. So again, today's theme is changes in ag technology. You guys aren't in the office right now. There's probably stuff going on now that you don't know about, right? So new things are, I'm sure, coming out as we go. And so it's always hard to kind of keep up. So we brought together a pretty good group of people that hopefully help you out. I'm just going to introduce their names, but I'm going to let them tell you a little more about themselves. I have Joe Luck from UNL, Dave Bassett as producer, Kelly Maaske from Midwest Farmers Co-op, and then John Orlicking from Elmwood, also a farmer. So I'll let them kind of introduce themselves, how we'll do this. They'll tell you a little bit about what they do, and then we're going to open up for questions. Questions you have, anything. You can ask them anything. They might not answer it, but you can ask them. Anyway, so we'll kind of go from there. Then I've got some questions that I can ask them as well if you don't have anything right away. But I'm going to go ahead and we'll just start here with Joe, and we'll go with the introductions, and we'll go from there.
All right. I think my microphone's on.
Green light?
Yep. Oh, good morning. I'm Joe Luck. I work here on the East Campus in agricultural engineering. I've been here at Nebraska coming up on 7 years now. And so I work in a little bit of everything with precision ag. So I work in the extension research and teaching program there. And we work with a lot of different projects. And so we do a lot of work with variable rate technology. We do a lot of work with sensor-based nitrogen management for corn. Some of you may have seen some of the data from our Project Sense. And then we're also engaged in a lot of national, even some international conversations on ag data and responsible use of data and security and ownership and things like that. So yeah, just kind of involved in a lot of different things. So if you have any questions about it, I'd be glad to try and share with you.
My name is Dave Bassett. I grew up on a family farm up in northeast Nebraska, and and just kind of progressed from a basic guidance is all we started with to writing our own prescriptions for seed, chemical, fertilizer, trying to do a little bit of everything with it as much as we possibly can to see what things work, what things don't. So we've got a little bit of data backed up, I guess, if you want to call it. So we've got a little bit of knowledge base on it. Oh my God.
My name's Kelly Maaske. I am currently the Ag Technology Manager for Midwest Farmers Co-op. Previously grown up in Southwest Nebraska in a farming community. Worked my way up through equipment dealerships, started out doing precision farming before it was called precision farming. From there, continued on to work for various technology companies in the ag field, which currently led me to my position as to where I'm at today with Midwest. My overall goal or focus within the cooperative system at Midwest is to bring in new technology for our growers. And when I say that, it's more so that I bring in the new technology and determine where that fits our grower base. And within doing that, then we in turn instruct or teach and work with our agronomists on different avenues to travel down as far as what may or may not work with our growers.
I'm John Orlicking, and I'm a producer east of Lincoln, and Had been collecting data for many years, but never really put it together. And so then here a few years ago, I changed tractors and planters, started doing variable rate scripting on that, changed the anhydrous machine, did variable rate nitrogen with that. And I'm starting to combine all that information over the last 5 or 6 years and using that within the farming operation and try to add something every year if possible. So the next ones are hoping to be either going to the sprayer with modulated pulse width or nozzles, and or going to the planter and going to
Down pressure.
down pressure, the hydraulic ground pressure, and the precision planting stuff. So.
Okay, thanks. So open up the questions. If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask, and if you're also online, you can type into the chat box as well and ask questions. But I'm going to hand you the mic so people can hear your questions when you ask them. Here you go, Larry.
Laurie Hetkins, northwest of here, about 20 miles. Kind of a debate, need to buy a new planter. And I hear a lot of conflicting information about air pressure, hydraulic pressure, combination of the two. Any of you on ag engineering, but particularly the farmer, and what you found out. Which direction would you go and why?
We run it.
You run it. Go ahead and talk to that.
We started out with an airbag, a static airbag system. And what we found, we switched it over to a precision planting hydraulic downforce system. And if I had one thing that they would allow me to put on a planter, it would be that. We saw a huge increase in emergence. Within 24 hours, I got all my plants up. You can go from, this is all by, their brochures, but after running it for 3 years, I think they're pretty accurate. Every half an inch at 5 miles an hour, it will adjust your downforce through the field. And it made a huge difference in our seed placement going across. I've got one field that I can hit 14 different soil types in one pass. And it made a huge difference. All them plants are right in the ground at the exact depth that I wanted. With a static system, you might hit that right spot once or twice through the field. With the active pneumatic, you might hit it 4 or 5 times. But with the active hydraulic, I think you're there, I would say 90 to 95% of the time.
Have you had to reduce your speed to 3.5 miles an hour?
No, actually I did not, because along with that hydraulic downforce, it has weigh pins, and that weigh pin will tell you how much your rows are bouncing. And I can go in one field, it depends on your tillage practices. I found in my no-till, I could go 5.5 to 6.5 even. In my tilled areas, I was down to that 4.5. Depending on the type of seed delivery you have attached to that will vary your speed. The speed tubes around here, I don't know how great they are. You might be able to gain 0.5 mile an hour because of that, but the higher above the trench that you're releasing that seed, the more bounce you're going to get. And the best practice to do for us, at least, has been to try to get that seed release at or within 1 inch of where it's going to land in that furrow.
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on your, if you're doing no-till versus, doing a lot of tillage, the seed bed preparation, stuff like that, and you got to be real careful you don't overdo it, because, you can compact the seed trench and cause some issues, but there's definitely some benefit to uniform emergence. I don't know if we have any data yet to support that, but there are some other states doing some work in that area that have seen some benefit. The other thing I think I would consider, it depends a lot on your fields that you're running in, but if you're going to get a new planter, looking at the section control aspect of it, we were actually just talking about that on sprayers a minute ago. If all your fields aren't perfectly square, and we've got some data that, if you have an idea of the perimeter of that field and the area of that field, you can actually do some quick estimates and figure out how much overlap you're going to have. And so if you're, with some of the sprayer data, we had different levels of automatic control versus manual control. And basically, if you average it all out, the grower we worked with, if they had a 100-acre field, with the manual system, he was spraying 115 acres on average, and you get down to a high resolution control, and that person was spraying 101 acres. And so you take that out over 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 acres, and that makes a big difference. So, and we've got some data we could help out kind of estimate that. So something to think about.
The planter before the one I purchased now, I put the section control on. And that was a much cheaper system, but that paid for itself in 1 year in cost and seed savings. So I took 16 bags of seed back and paid for that. The seed guy didn't like that too well, but you know, I did. That wasn't even including what the yield response was for overlap. So that technology does pay for itself very rapidly.
What depth are you planting at then? What depth are you planting at?
I haven't changed my planting depth. I'm still 1.5 inches, 2 inches after I come to all the cover crop stuff, though. It looks like I need to go deeper. They keep telling me I have to go deeper. So I guess we might try a field of that this year.
We usually plant, I would say, my target's 2.5. This year I might actually go to about 2 3/4.
As far as depth?
Question was on bean planting.
That's a tougher one. I guess I'm a firm believer in sticking those down in the ground quite a ways too. I've just had too many years where we think, oh, we're going to get a rain the next night and we'll get them up out of the ground, and then it stays dry for 2 weeks, and so they'll come up out of the ground as long as it doesn't crust. So I'm a firm believer in sticking them down in the moisture as well.
Yep, I absolutely agree.
I know on getting the row shut off is pretty important for corn, but what about beans? Does it really matter on the overlap on beans? They seem to be able to take the population. Corn senses competition, but do you use the row shut off on beans too?
We do, and I think you're going to see a lot more of that coming into the soybean side just because of what the seed cost is becoming in soybeans as well.
I would echo that. It's not so much on the yield side, I don't think, on soybeans as it is the seed savings. If you start looking at what a bag of beans starts to cost, you need to save as many of those as you can. Spread them out over more acres.
I guess this is mostly to the farmers. What are we planting for row? Are we splitting beans or not splitting beans?
I'm still in 30-inch rows. I'd love to go down to a split row. I just don't know that the yield advantage at this particular point offsets the cost of the equipment. There's just the equipment's gotten so expensive. If I could find a cheaper piece of equipment maybe to do it, I might do it in that respect. But we're getting good herbicide control. It used to be you needed that for canopy. We're getting good control in the 30-inch rows. And I just can't justify the extra piece of equipment at this particular point. So I don't know what you're saying.
We're Rod, you probably know, I work for Russ. So we have actually been doing 15-inch corn and soybeans for about 10 years now. And the I think there's definitely, I would say 7 out of 10 years, I would say we've probably been at or above the average yield. Just because, like we talked about, all the seed savings, and when you start narrowing up your rows, you get your canopy quicker, your chemical costs can go down, your nitrogen utilization goes up. So you're putting seeds where your fertilizer is more often than not. The only problem that we have with the narrow row corn is that you cannot side dress all of your applications for fertilizer up front. And our biggest drawback is we're so close to Lincoln that we can't even have like late season flown on. So you have to do everything up front, which does change seeding rates. It does change fertilizer rates, everything like that. I believe so, yes, because, like I said, we're getting the canopy. So we're utilizing the light permutation. That right phrase, and we're also utilizing the soil moisture.
Yeah, the bean.
That was one huge thing for us too, because we were able to plant our corn and our soybeans then with the same planter and use all the rows. When you start talking about rebuild costs, you double it. So there is additional costs in going to that.
Yeah, where I grew up, we did all 7.5-inch row soybeans with, you know, a 15-foot planter. I spent many acres in that thing over the years. And, you know, one of the things, like you said, is spreading that planter cost out, you know, if you are, and then your field efficiency, you know, if you're using a 16-row planter to do your corn and soybeans versus, you know, having a 10 or 20-foot, you're going to get your soybeans planted a lot faster. So there's all these different things you have to think about. And of course, we can do a study and look at row spacing on soybeans, but then, you know, for instance, one of the issues has always been, well, you get canopy quicker with the narrow rows. Well, if you got all the rainfall you need, then that's, you know, as far as protecting any soil moisture, that's not even be a factor then. So weather plays a big part in some of that stuff too. So
It's always the great equalizer.
Yeah, because I saw, you know, neighbors over the years got away from drilling beans, just the price of beans got, you know, higher too and everything. And then also the rebuilding of the drills. The first time they had to rebuild a no-till drill, they about, you know, wetted themselves because of the cost of that. Now I'm starting to see some guys come back and they're starting to drill wider beans now and everything and get some of the split row planters. And it's just trying to figure out where's the cost in this thing, you know, is it going to pay for itself?
yeah, I sat through an interesting talk Al Dutcher did, and I think Tyler confirmed it the other day. You know, Al said the odds of having intense sporadic rainfall through the year are way more likely than having a drought. That's kind of what I took away from his talk. And so sometimes we always think about planning for the drought, and it's like, well, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to do 7.5-inch rows or something, but that may not even be the best situation in the long run.
Okay. Well, I have Larry's got one. Here you go. Here's the mic for you.
You and Russ have kind of experimented with narrow row corn about as much as anybody in this area. The corn head. What have you learned about that? And I think you and Mr. Harlan both have pretty much built your own corn heads. And can you tell us a little bit about where you've been on that, where you're going on it, and some of your experiences?
Very expensive, very heavy, and hard to find parts. We are actually in the process of switching our corn operation back to 20-inch rows just because there's a lot more factory support. With the 15-inch, you're looking at a custom built head. And there's very few manufacturers, only 3 that I know of. And they're so different in how they're designed. You know, obviously each one of them is going to tell you theirs is the best. And unfortunately, it's one of those things that you can't really do side by sides because the neighbors don't have anything. And you're not going to go buy 2 of them in thoughts that you're going to return one. It's just not economically feasible. We did it because the utilization on the other end, it was the biggest thing, is that we could utilize that planter for all the acres as opposed to, like we talked about, getting a different one. And having to maintain 2 is a lot harder than maintaining 1. But yeah, the corn head is a challenge. I will say that for sure. One thing that we did find with the narrow row is in the years where a lot of the neighbors had the corn laying on the ground, ours stood up fairly well. I don't know if it was because, you know, you're every 15 inch, so it's leaning up against the other one before it falls completely down. And when you do have the down corn and stuff laying on the ground, you can basically pick which direction you want to go. You don't really have to follow the row. What we found on I believe it was a 28,000 population, you're at roughly a 15 by 15 square going through the field.
There are some companies, MacDon makes a omnidirectional.
Gearing is making one that they're advertising as a multi-directional. And it is a 15-inch corn head. It is set up on 15-inch rows, and they're advertising it and marketing it as a multi-directional corn head.
where we're probably going to have to go to putting on our fertilizer at least split. Possibly, it looks like 3-4 times is even better. We run into the same thing with aerial application work, but now too many acreages around. That 20-inch row that you said you're going to now, do you still think you can get in there with a high boy and with Y splitters and put that?
I may try that this year, is to put some drops on and at least try it on a couple of fields to see how it works. Whether we can go straight with the row or if we have to go across the row and just try to drop that fertilizer wherever it goes, and see if we get enough benefit to justify taking it large scale. A lot of it is, there's no research. A lot of the times we're our own guinea pigs, succeed or fail. It's our own stuff. And there's been numerous things that we've tried that you're going to find, if you're trying to do something new, you're going to find a whole lot of things that don't work before you find that magic thing that does. If you ever do find that magic thing that does.
I'll just wing it. I think he can probably hear it.
What I was going to say was, my beans are in twins, 10-inch spread on a 30-inch center, so there's 20 inches between the inside. So you should be able. I don't run wide drops through that because I got the older style; it won't fit through there. But you get the newer style where you can narrow it up. You should be able to drive with the rows. I have the argument with the co-op all the time. I get behind on my spraying, and they end up going diagonal in the beans, and I drive down the rows. I don't run anything down. You got to stay awake. You got to pay attention to what you're doing. But you can fit these new, unless you've got wide tires on your sprayer. Self-propelled sprayer will go down a 20-inch row without any trouble. Timing will be the big thing. You don't want to get it too big where you're breaking a lot of leaves off going through there. But you should also see a efficiency increase on the nitrogen that way. So that shouldn't be a big issue. We run 2 planters, but I grow seed, and sometimes seed doesn't show up when it's supposed to, and I might be planting corn from April 20th to June 5th, and switching between crops is a pain in the butt because you never know. They'll call and say, "Oh yeah, today you're going to go." Well, tomorrow they call, "No, you're not going today. We're going to hold you off," and you set. So I built a twin row planter, sort of, and the canopy 7 to 10 days sooner. And if you have Palmer like I do west of me, and some of it, canopy is good for everything. Even if you don't have a drought issue, if you have rainfall, that canopy is intercepting the rainfall, slowing it down, so it's not hitting the ground at full speed. Because I hate irrigating if I don't have a canopy yet because of runoff, soil sealing, even in no-till. So that's my 2 cents on it.
I just have a question for the farmers or Kelly or whoever, but are you guys making your own prescriptions, or are you using a service to do that? Or Kelly, are you doing that, or do you have guys that are doing that for you?
I've got a very talented individual that helps me with that. Yeah, we're writing all of our fertilization and seeding recs in-house. And the majority of what we will use is SST system.
Before Kelly came, I'm a member of Midwest Farmers Co-op. They had a gentleman, and he was helping me. He ended up leaving. I didn't feel secure, and so I've switched over to the field view system. Building my scripts in that now. I'm not trying to take business away from them. It just kind of secures my ability to do what I need to do at that time. And I don't have to get all my data to them. They have to analyze it, get it back to me. It's just I sit down at night and make 4 different scripts for the field, decide which one I like, then export it to the planter, and away we go. So, or to the sprayer, or to the whatever you have it there for. So,
and we're starting to see more growers start to go that route. And I'll be honest with you, I was hesitant to start within going down that that climate road because, just as John says, some of me thinks that, that's taking some business away from what we provide for the growers. The more we get into it, I'm actually seeing it as a benefit to both parties, because what that allows us to do, it's easy data capturing for the grower. I mean, it's seamless data transfer. Once that data goes to their climate account, if I've got a good working relationship with John, which I feel as if I do, and I must, because I asked John, will you share your account with me? And it's all of a tap of a button. He shares his account with me. If for some reason he doesn't get to his prescriptions, or if he doesn't have time to do them, we can send that to our other individuals that do the scripting for us. And therefore it's all, she can do everything right there from her office, from her desk. You're not running around trying to pull thumb drives or information out of monitors. It's so much easier to do now than what it was 5-10 years ago.
One of the things I've found about pulling a card, this has happened to me numerous times. I think I got all my data. It showed up on the monitor, but I stick it in the computer and half of it's gone. And you're like, at least when I have the climate account, if it's reading on the screen, it's going to the cloud because I have the cellular data. So it's there. I've got that captured, and it is seamless, and it's all mine. And I still work with the agronomist and with Kelly on a lot of that. And it is nice. It's there. And we did do a side-by-side one. It was probably 2 years ago. We set up the SMS system, or it was SST, I'm not for sure. And we set up the climate system and built both scripts for the same fields. Not knowing the science behind theirs, but kind of knowing how SST works, and maybe Joe and these guys can talk to this too, but there was very, very few differences. They showed up very similar, enough similar that I wasn't worried about just going in and plugging it in. So.
And I think moving forward, as far as where we stand within the co-op, those are some of the trials and information that we're trying to gather over the next couple of years. It's pretty obvious to me that climate really isn't going anywhere. If they do, it's because somebody else finds more value within them. So I mean, to me, it's one of those programs that's going to be here to stay, and we need to be utilizing more of it.
I think those other programs are super powerful. I'm not putting those down at all. But as far as farmer user friendly, that's where I found the ease at. Those others, you're going to spend some serious time in the office if you're buying the program yourself. And that's unfortunately a luxury I don't have. I'm kind of a one-man operation. I have a couple guys that help, but for the most part, I don't have that. And so I need something that's readily available and fairly quick, and I can move on it and trust that it's going to work. So
we use the SMS program, and I write all of our prescriptions in-house, and we don't use anything cloud-based. I mean, we have the capability to do it. We just, for our operation, chose not to. And for us, it was easier to do it all in-house than it was to try for timing, to get it to somebody else, back to us. If we have an issue, then call back again and go back and forth and back and forth. Now I can just pull it up on the laptop and have the owner of the company come in and say, no, change that just a little bit. And it's a matter of 2 or 3 minutes as opposed to a full day or day and a half. And it's what works for us. Like John was saying, there's no right or wrong system. It's just what works best for every individual. That's why there is a million different companies out there that do the same thing.
Right.
One thing I would caution on, though, if you're going to head down the technology path, is do a little homework on what system what direction you're going to go, because red doesn't like to talk to green and green doesn't like to talk to red.
Yep.
And some of them don't like to talk to climate and some of them don't like to talk to SMS or what. I mean, there's just, if you're going to head down a path, you're kind of I hate to say that, but you're locking yourself in a direction.
Yes.
And they can claim ISO all they want to. There's some real challenges with ISO as well. If everybody would standardize to that and make it work, it'd be great, but that's just not as easy as they make it sound. So,
and just to touch on that real briefly, you know, some of the things that I was thinking about last night after I sat down was, you know, how do I confront a group of growers and get them to see value in anything I say. But you know, what is the one thing that I want you guys to take away from this? And to me, I think the most important thing that I would try to convey to you is if you're new into technology, if you're expanding your technology platform, do research on all of them, but focus on one of them and focus on that particular one that you feel is going to suit your operation the best. Within doing that, some of the questions you have to answer are, is it compatible? Is it adaptable? Am I willing to be adaptable and make my whole operation run around, you know, these 2 or 3 products? But I think looking at it, you really have to focus in on, you know, I would don't get yourself overwhelmed with everything that's out there, the latest and the greatest. It's neat, it's cool to look at, it's got some show, some flair, but really make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons, and those reasons are to move your operation forward.
Serviceability and support are 2 big keys too. Make sure you've got somebody, or that you can find the company that really does have the people there to stand behind it. The one other comment I was going to make about the technology, and this goes back to the sustainability. Data is great, and so far nobody's used it against us, and hopefully they won't. But that data is all mine and collected, and I have an argument back to how I'm being sustainable and what I'm doing to minimize application or over application, and how I'm enhancing every acre. So I think that's important. I ran into a situation this year. We started knowing on satellite imagery I had a problem in a field, and I'm like, what is going on here? It was just one perfect strip. So we started looking back. You looked at the nitrogen rec, and it was fine. But then you look at the nitrogen as applied map, and you could see where the tank had bounced just a little bit. And there's just a few different colors through that line, but it wasn't much different than the rest of it. But when it came down to harvesting, the yield monitor showed 40 to 50 bushel difference per acre down through that strip. And that was something that was key to me. I'm like, before I would have just said, well, that must have been a wet spot. We must have had some planter, but we were able to track it back. And that was just by going back and looking through. And if anybody wants to see that, I did bring the iPad, but it was amazing how much difference that made. And we were able to track it back. So
yeah, in early spring, you really couldn't see it through the imagery. But boy, come harvest time or right before, it was pretty obvious.
Yeah, only a couple comments I would make is actually the way that we process data is almost consistent across all these platforms. So the actual techniques that they're using, you know, the secret sauce that everybody builds into their algorithms, how they prescribe nitrogen based on if it's historic yield, and all those are the differences that exist out there. The 2 comments I would make is, especially when I'm sharing my data with someone else, so if it's climate or if it's my John Deere, if it's a co-op, anybody, I just want to have a conversation about data ownership and data security. You know, if you're doing it all in-house, you don't have to worry about that at all because you've got the data yourself. But it's just understanding how your data is being used once it leaves your machine or once it leaves your office. That's really going to be important moving forward. And the only other thing I would say is, and I get a lot of varied responses, so I don't know if I can ask questions as a panel. That may
well, if you don't, I'd like to.
Right.
Well, the other thing I would say is I get a lot of varied feedback when I say, okay, you're working with somebody that's doing variable rate prescription. How do you know that paid you back doing that variable rate prescription? And I think that's one of the things we really want to encourage moving forward is how do you see that, and encouraging these folks that are doing that kind of work to prove that variable rate prescription, you know, I'm paying for that service, that it made me money in the end.
And we found, you know, if you look at a dry script, if you pull 2 core samples out of an 80 every 40 acres or whatever, you know, it may say you need 2 tons of lime across the whole thing. Whereas the variable rate script tells you need 10 ton over here and nothing on the rest of it. I think that's one of the ways it pays. And we found that one for sure. The other one that's nice, it doesn't matter what platform you're in. It's not very hard to drop a test block. Right in the middle of somewhere. You know, what's interesting about the climate platform, and I'm not pushing that, but they have a seed advisor, and it tells you what they think you should plant on that field for a population. It'll do the script. You put in it takes the soil type, your soil test data, your yield data. It takes all that. You put in a price of what the seed costs, put in a price of what the current corn price is, and then it generates a script across your field for all of that on how many zones you want. And it is still skewed a little bit towards the eastern belt. And I'm getting some populations in the 37,000 range. I'm in southeast Nebraska. So you can scale that back down. But the nice part about that is, and within a minute, I can put one of those zones back in, just an acre zone of that high population, to see if their script was right. So I can test it pretty easily to see how close they are, if that really would pay. So that's kind of, I think, one of the ways you go down that path. And then also I worked with Joe this year. We did a soybean population test, and that was kind of neat to see on the as applied map how many different times my planter changed through the field. I don't know, Joe, how many different population trials we had, but my field had a lot of different colors in it. So.
And it's real easy now with the technology that we have. Once you do something, you can go back and compare it to if it worked, if it didn't. Did it cost you money? Did it save you money? Was it a no change? The economic software that's built into most of these programs now is you can enter the values that are for your specific elevator, not even your specific region. So you can really get it down to what your exact seed cost was, what your exact fuel costs were, everything. And it will spit out information that you want it to.
You were mentioning about the trials for, was it soybean population?
Mm-hmm.
I know corn is all over the place, but I read an article about the guy that set the record for soybean yield, and he was saying about going down as low as 50, 60,000 per acre. Now, did any of that show? I had some beans I planted 15-inch rows, and the drill wasn't set quite right, and I got a thinner population that I wanted. But I noticed that especially on the good soil, those plants just branched clear out. I had 220, 230 pods per plant, but the damn stems were as big as your thumb. I think I broke some sickle sections, but more than normal. But I wondered if if you were aware of that, and if you've tried any populations that low and saw a yield difference. So
I'm going to let Joe speak to this in just a second, because he knows the data way better than I do on that. I saw the same article. The guy went down to 35,000 population before he saw a yield difference. I did this 10 years ago. I did my own trials. I had my planter. My planter wasn't working right. It was a cyclo planter, so all the beans weren't hitting on the drum. So I was shooting for like 100, 150, and 200 or whatever. Well, I ended up with like an 80, a 140, but there wasn't a bushel worth of difference across that entire field when I did that. What I will say though is that year made me really nervous because we got some heavy rains and I had a really uneven stand. And it's at that point where you're going, if it's all uniform and that you're at that low population, I think you're okay. If you start getting that sporadic seed placement out there, you're kind of going, all right, what do I do now? You're going to have some weed pressure. You're going to have some things like that. So I think that makes a difference. But Joe compiled all the data, and I'm going to let him talk about that because he knows that better than I do. So
I haven't seen any done that low, any soybean seed population. I think most of ours, we stopped at 100,000. Now, we were just talking about, it'd be worth checking the on-farm research website. So I don't know if anybody hadn't looked at that, but you can, go to the UNL on-farm research, and you can actually select, look at soybean rate studies and just see how low. I think they may have done some down to 75,000, but that's what we were just talking about. Yeah. Jim Speck to be the guy to ask and he's, semi-retired, but he was always a soybean, breeding and fertility specialist for UNL. But we went down to 100,000. So I think both the studies we did this last year, it was 100, 125, 150, and 175. And I mean, we got to collect some more background data to look at, is there soil texture issues? NRCS gets you in the ballpark, but those maps aren't really made for this type of analysis. But if we can get our Veris data collected and actually look at soil texture, we might be able to see if there's differences then in that rate response in different areas of the field that might have different soil textures, different terrain issues like that. But just when you just look at all the data at once, the 100 to 125,000, from a profit standpoint, there was little or no yield difference, and you just saved all that seed. So it's in terms of a field average, the lower populations are just saving you a lot of money on seed, and we just didn't see the yield loss for them. So, and that's we did 2 this year like that, and in this particular project, we do blocks of that 4 rates, and I think we had about 16 to 18 reps of those blocks across the field, which gives you a little bit, the more reps you have in that study, the tighter you can get in on those differences between yield averages. But anyway, that's kind of what we saw this year. But I'd check the On-Farm Research website and see if they've done any that have gone a lot lower than that and see what they found.
And, that's one thing we'll all sit up here and talk about, the data you can collect from a tractor, the data you can collect from your SMS, your climate, your SST. A great resource is Google. Go online, check what, University of Nebraska has done, what Iowa State has done. Iowa State has great research on the livestock. They do huge studies on livestock. Purdue University does amazing studies on almost everything from fertilizer to seed to soil research to anything you can imagine. Use all the platforms that are available. One of the ones that I go on all the time is there's an Ag Talk discussion forum, and they have data on tractors, discs, anything you can imagine. And if it's out there, utilize it.
Yeah, and I'm a huge advocate for trials, and you can get online and you can research whatever you want to research, but at the end of the day, there's no reason why each one of you guys isn't putting in your own trials. It's a little bit of work, and it is sometimes a pain, but the data that you receive from doing a trial on your own soil, on your own farm, there's nothing more valuable than that. But at the end of the day, you've got to do something with that data. And for so long, I've seen growers got to collect the data. They get the data collected, they put it on a thumb drive, and then it sits on the office desk all year long. And not, and this is not a joke. I've had guys bring me a Ziploc bag full of 10 or 15 thumb drives and say, I've collected all this data. What can you do with it? For me, that's a nightmare. But, we see it a lot. And I think up until recently, and I say recently, the last few years, growers are starting to see the importance on what this data can provide them that they've captured. So it's one thing to collect it, but it's another thing to make good use of it.
One question I was going to ask, and Kelly might be able to be best to answer this, but what do you see is maybe hear from a lot of people is maybe what the best bang for the buck is, if I don't want to jump in 2 feet, maybe it might be the good way to get my feet wet and kind of tackle some of this. I imagine there are a lot of people that don't know what SMS or SST, and I'm pretty sure you just, made my dad freak out when he said all those acronyms. But, so I imagine there are probably people like that. So I just didn't know if you had any comments on maybe where to jump in.
The only thing, or the thing that comes to the top of my mind when I have somebody that's curious about getting into any of that is talk to your trusted advisor. Insert plug here. For me, it's getting our growers to talk to their agronomists. it doesn't matter if I mean, to this day and age, there are so many different people selling and promoting different technologies, whether it be your agronomist, your seed salesman, your chemical salesman, the guy down the road that's selling for any certain company. It doesn't matter who it is. If you find somebody and you value their opinion, go visit with them about it. I don't know of any of our agronomists that wouldn't be willing to sit down and have a conversation, whether you were or weren't currently doing business with us. They're going to give you their honest opinion. I am a firm believer that any advice I give to you guys or anybody else it may be is advice that I would take myself. Because at the end of the day, it is my job to see you succeed. If you don't succeed, I don't succeed. So we all are in this together, in my opinion. And at the end of the day, I would just say, seek out that trusted person that you feel comfortable visiting with. How'd I do?
Perfect. You know, I'd say if somebody's at the very basics and has not, I would start with a grid sample and look at that and compare it to the old soil map to the grid sample and ask that person ahead of time, tell me the different spots in this field from memory. You've harvested in enough years. Tell me what, and then look at that and see if there's some correlation. Then if they'll accept that, then let's start with the application. Let's do a couple years worth of variable rate technology on that and apply it. And then let's see if we've got any yield difference. And then if hopefully if they are doing enough, they've got technology in the combine that they can collect that yield data or just do aggregate yield data. And then they go to that, then move on to collecting, more precise yield data, overlaying that if they can, and then start moving. Okay, you believe these two and we've proved these two. Let's go on to the variable rate planning. The big one that's kind of a tough one is variable rate nitrogen, but I'm experimenting with that. And you just keep moving into it and keep baby stepping it all the way up, because it is expensive to get into. And that's the one nice thing about the newer technology, like doing the test plots. I'm going through the field and I'm like, this looks like a good spot for 200,000. I just push the button and the planter kicks on and it puts out 200,000, and I got to get back to 100,000, and I go back there and away we go. Otherwise, with the old planter, I was out there changing sprockets and everything else, and that became more difficult. So there is some, I guess, if somebody's looking towards that, this is where I've talked to Kelly. You got to talk to the guy about when he's going to make that change. Have that conversation ahead of time, and then which direction do you want to go, and what things do you want to do, and what do you want to collect? Because it's all hinged on how you start. So.
And John made a very valid point, one in which I, tend to overlook. But it doesn't matter who you are if you don't know what's in your soil to begin with and where you are on that grade scale. That is always probably the most important, in my mind, the most important place to start. Because realistically, it doesn't matter if you want to grow 300 bushel corn. If the nutrients aren't there in the soil, you're never going to get there.
Okay, well, I know we're about out of time, but I wanted to give you guys a chance if you had any last comments or parting things you would like to say, maybe you think is important that we didn't touch on that think it'd be useful for the group to hear.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Just following up on that last little bit of conversation, I would say your first step, my suggestion is always getting a couple years of data collected. If you have a yield monitor, kind of start things, and then maybe checking grid sampling if you see yield variability. But the biggest thing there is don't try and jump in and do everything all at once. It's kind of like John said, pick the thing you want to go after first and work on that, for a year or two, and then think about variable rate seed, variable rate nitrogen, whatever that's going to be, because time is money, and so if you're going to get into all this, I think that's the two big dividers in precision ag is you've got a lot of this stuff is plug and play, auto steer, auto section control. You don't have to do anything extra to adopt those. In other words, you get them installed and you're good to go. All this other stuff takes a data analysis and prescriptive mapping and all that stuff, which, is probably going to cost you $10, $15 an acre. I don't know the exact number what people are charging, but So if you're not going to do that, which is going to take your time, you're going to pay somebody to do it for you. So just recognize that that has to go in as a factor as well. So we're always welcoming. There's a lot of great folks working across the state, trusted advisors. We're always totally welcome to share our experiences with different technologies. And, I would say it's almost constant. You think you're going to do this one technology adoption, but it's going to affect 2 or 3 other things that maybe you didn't think about that, it'd be worth. It's always nice just to bounce ideas off of people. So we're always open to do that on the extension side too. So.
And when we talk about trusted advisors and people that you value on opinions, it's not just those of us in the room. It's not just your agronomist. It goes all the way to your equipment suppliers and dealers. Anything that's going to affect your operation, you need to pull the information you can out of them, or seek them for the information, because like Joe said, if you get started down one lane, chances are it's probably going to affect 3 or 4 other things down the road that you may not see. So it's always good to start with those conversations ahead of time.
Biggest thing that I would say is know where you are and where you want to go. If you don't know where you want to go, it's hard to even get started in precision ag. And you have to do what works on your farm. Just because the neighbor across the road's doing something doesn't mean that it's going to work on your farm and your acres. You have to know what you as an individual want before you can even go out and start talking to a company that's going to help you. Because if you don't know what you want, they sure don't.
The data is knowledge. We've known that for years. We've been collecting, we've been changing seed corns and varieties and getting the best one to get the best ROI. And I would say that's what technology does, is you're looking to maximize those acres and get the best ROI. And a lot of my data, I'm probably not utilizing it to the max, but I'm collecting that data because I have a 14-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter, and I don't know what their intentions are, but I look at what happened since I graduated from college back in the 90s to what's happened to today. And it's immense. And I guess I'm saying that data may, like Kelly said, that bag of drives may become very useful for them in the future to be very profitable and very successful in their farming operation. And I was going to touch on one last thing. Joe had talked about data security. There is some concern about that. Here a year or so ago, Monsanto sent out a deal that they were going to start collecting all that data from all their growers, and it was going to stay in-house. It was just basically for R&D. They were not going to sell any of that. And I took them at their word on that because I knew some of the people that had written that agreement. But there's always breaches, and I guess you run that risk with any data collection. They can always get that. But they're using that data to support us and go to make us better farmers too. So I in that sense, I don't have any problem sharing that data. If the federal government starts manipulating markets with it, we have an issue. But
I'll add on to what John said about that is you not only have to know who you have an agreement with, but you have to know who that person has an agreement with as far as data collection and sharing.
At least they told you.
That right?
Right. Yeah. What was funny was they were one of the last ones in the industry to come and do that. Everybody else had been doing that, and they were afraid everybody was going to throw a fit about that. And they were actually one of the last ones on the holdouts on that. And they finally said, well, we've got to do it too to be competitive. So that's when they sent out that agreement, which I found interesting.
I would look for that to continue in the future. I mean, I don't know if a lot of people knew this, but Monsanto got rid of most of their field technicians, and they do instead of doing the trials themselves, they're dependent on the people that use those products. Now they're collecting that data to use in their own yield trials and performance trials. And so they've got precision planting monitors, so now they know what varieties are planted where, what rates. They've got if you got their yield monitor in your system, of course they can tie into other yield monitors. So I would look for those opportunities more and more in the future that folks are going to want you all to help them do a lot of this research. And Extension's been doing it for a long time, but the companies, that's going to be something that happens more and more often too, I think.
Another system that the co-op uses is R7 by Winfield, and I mean they're doing that too with all their answer plots. all across the nation. They're collecting that data and aggregating it so you can see that. So it's just not one company doing that. Everybody is doing that.
No, it's across the board. And, you know, I look at it from my standpoint. I don't see that as being any more of a concern than, you know, my local bank having my bank account number. I know. Yeah, yeah, well.
Yeah.
Point taken. But yeah, I guess I look at it from the point of view that the data and information that is collected by these guys, I would like to think that they're trying to use it to move their products forward, advance their strategies as far as the benefits and what they provide for you guys as an end result. I think it allows them to make better hybrids and make, you know, seeds more disease resistance for specific areas. I guess I look at it as a benefit to the grower as an end result.
The producers, I presume that you're using starter fertilizer on the seed, and have you gone now to the 1 inch on each side of the seed? And is that profitable or anything of this sort?
I'll let you answer that first because
we've only ever done in furrow starter with ours. We're not set up to do anything off the row, the 2x2 or anything like that. This year we added on to our planter with it's a precision planting product. It's the Furrow Jet, and it can place it off to the side and on the seed, and you can do multiple products. And we're going to start a trial with that for ourselves, but I don't have any data whatsoever on in furrow 2 inches, 3 inches. And with our practices, we weren't able to side dress or do anything additional after the fact either.
So my fields all look like a snake slithered through them.
Mm-hmm.
So and I have lots of terraces. So side dress is not an option for me. In furrow, when I bought my planter, I guess I looked at the university's data, and there is some response, but most of it was not enough to put that system on. It looked like the better response was later in the season, if you can get that nitrogen there later. I guess so. That's the way I went, and I didn't do that. Now, if I do change this planter, becomes the question whether I retrofit my planter now to the precision stuff or whether I go to a new planter and put the precision stuff on. That's something I'll have to weigh out and look at the data again and see if that's beneficial. But at this point I haven't done it. So
we're not.
They keep trying to talk me into it.
Right. Yeah.
And again, I think that's to another technology. I'm getting off subject here a little bit. Was fungicide. The same field that I had the problem on with the anhydrous. The anhydrous problem about 100 rows over. We did that field is actually straight. We did a fungicide trial that made an 18 bushel difference by not applying fungicide there. The year before I'd done it on soybeans and didn't see a bushel of difference, but everybody had a 12 to 15 bushel response this year on soybeans. This happened to be on corn that I saw the 18 bushel difference. But back to foliar feeding, I think that's one of those things you got to try on a small scale, multiple years, and hopefully you have the yield technology to see that and go with that. And if it pays, I say you stick with it. I mean, it's just one of those deals you have to do trials, and I've not done enough of it yet to speak to that.
And I think I am not your trusted advisor, your local agronomist, but I would say from what I've seen over the last 2 or 3 years that we've been doing, that I've seen data on the fungicide trials that we have done, I have yet to see less than probably a 10 bushel increase, give or take. I will say that a lot of that probably depends on the type of weather you have any given year from one year to another. Tyler, I'm sure you can speak on that. But at the end of the day, I personally have not seen it cost money over the last 3 years.
I think more and more you're going to see solutions, for what I kind of call responsive crop management. And so, we're working a lot with that in the nitrogen system right now, where we're using the crop canopy sensors to try and direct nitrogen where it's needed and where it's maybe not needed. And I think you're going to see the same thing in pest management as well. So trying to wait, as long as you can before you have to make some kind of application like that. And then, before you have to pull the trigger. And we're seeing a lot of tools out there now. I think maybe even Climate Corps is working on a tool where they're tracking weather, and they're going to try and say, hey, you've had several days of this weather. You probably need to check on, this issue out in your fields. But I think that's where the future is going to be, is trying to use as much information as you have up until that point in time where you got to say, yeah, I need to make a decision. But then again, back to the very beginning, I always tell people, put a check strip in or two, always I'm not going to change anything, and then I'm going to do this new thing over here and see what that response was. Because at the end of the day, and I saw it even this last summer, I was at a meeting and I told them, we got to quit talking about yield differences, because somebody will say, well, I've got this wonderful product and it'll make you 3 bushels an acre. And I said, well, how much does it cost an acre? If it costs $20 an acre, well, you just lost money by putting it out there, and then you got to think about, did it cost me an extra trip across the field and all these different things. So again, thinking about dollars per acre on everything, application cost, application product, and what the yield was at the end of the day. I mean, that's got to be, if I see another chart with yield on it, I'm just going to, I'm going to say, I want to see dollars. I want to see dollars per acre.
And I think some of that goes back to our sustainability again. I think we're going to get to a point where technology is site specific. We're going to keep our fields now are 160 acres. They're going to be down to sub-inch. I mean, we're already planting at that, but I think we're going to start to see applications at that by different sensoring, that's almost scary to a point, because it's going to be almost machine based at that point. A machine will go out there and treat that one specific plant or kill that one specific weed. And I've already seen some of those things happening. And it comes back to sustainability. That's how we maximize the most out of a sub-inch to feed the world and at the best economic return. So I think that's where this data really becomes important. As we collect that, we're going to start to see that shrink down, and we're going to start treating almost individual plants at some point. So.
Okay. Well, we could go for days, but right, you put on the spot for that. But let's give these guys a hand. I appreciate you